Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we will look at non-monic quadratic equations. We're going to look at equations like this that are a quadratic because they have an x squared term, trinomials because there are 3 terms, but the coefficient of x squared is not 1. See, in previous lessons, when we looked at quadratic trinomials, there was no number written in front of x squared. The coefficient of x squared was 1. Now we're looking at trinomials where the coefficient of x squared is not 1, where there's a number written there. So unfortunately, when this number's not 1, we can't use the process we learned for quadratic trinomials in a previous lesson. We can't just find 2 numbers that multiply to this and add to that. Instead, we need to follow this method here. So this method talks about a, b, and c. So a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant term. So in order to do this, we're still going to factorize and use the null factor law, but the way we factorize is a bit more complicated. So first step, calculate AC. So in this case, a is 2, c is negative 25, so a times c is negative 50. So the next step is we need to find 2 numbers that multiply to AC and add to B. We want 2 numbers that multiply to negative 50 and add to negative 5. So if you're unsure, go through factors of 50 and you should see that it ends up being negative 10 and positive 5, because negative 10 times 5 is negative 50, negative 10 plus 5 is negative 5. So what do you do with these numbers? You split up the middle term using these numbers. What do I mean by that? So what I do is I'm going to leave the first term alone. I'm going to split up negative 5x. I'm going to write it as negative 10x plus 5x. And I leave the last term alone as well. See, where did I get these numbers negative 10 and 5 from? They were the 2 numbers I calculated in step 2. Those 2 numbers are the coefficients that go here and here. All right, so when I've done that, we're going to factorize in pairs. What we're going to do is we're going to factorize the first 2 separately and the next 2 separately using highest common factor. So the highest common factor of these 2 terms is 2x. So I take 2x out the front. Now, what do you times by 2x to get 2x squared? Well, you times by x. What do you times by 2x to get negative 10x? Well, you times by negative 5. All right, let's look at these 2 terms. Well, they have a highest common factor of 5. So I put 5 at the front. What do you times by 5 to get 5x? Just x. What do you times by 5 to get negative 25? And that's, of course, negative 5. So now what I need to do is factorize again. See, this is like 1 term and 2 terms. They have a common factor of x minus 5. So when you're up to this step, what's in the bracket should be the same or you've done something wrong. So I'm going to write that highest common factor, x minus 5, out the front. And what's left goes in the brackets. What do I times by x minus 5 to get this? Well, you're timesing it by 2x. What do you times by x minus 5 to get this one here? Well, you're timesing it by positive 5. So a much simpler way to think of that, just put the common bracket out the front, and what's left, 2x plus 5, goes in the second bracket. So now we have factorized this expression. We can use the null factor law, because if something times something equals 0, either the first something equals 0, so if x minus 5 equals 0, x equals 5. Either the first something equals 0 or the second something equals 0. So if 2x plus 5 equals 0, you've solved equations like this a million times. Subtract 5, divide by 2, you get negative 5 over 2. They are the 2 solutions and we're done. All right, let's try this one here. Once again, quadratic trinomial. It is non-monic because the coefficient of x squared is not 1. Now, there are no common factors here, so we can't take out a common factor. So I'm going to need to use this process here. So first step, calculate a times C. So 9 times 16 is 144. I want two numbers that multiply to 144 and add to negative 24. Turns out those two numbers are negative 12 and negative 12. So I'm going to split up this middle term accordingly. I'm going to rewrite this as 9x squared minus 12x minus 12x plus 16 equals 0. Okay, I've done the first three steps. Now I need to factorize in pairs. I'm going to factorize the first two using highest common factor, factorize the second two using highest common factor. So 9x squared and 12x, their highest common factor is 3x. So what do I times by 3x to get 9x squared? 3x. What do I times by 3x to get negative 12x? Well, that's negative 4. So when you have a negative here, for the third term, take out a negative factor. So the highest common factor in 12 and 16 is 4, but because this one is negative, I'm going to take out a factor of negative 4. What do I times by negative 4 to get negative 12x? Well, positive 3x. What do I times by negative 4 to get positive 16? Well, that's negative 4. So once again, at this stage, the two brackets you have should be the same or you've done something wrong. So what we do is we write the bracket that's common out the front, and then what's left goes in the other bracket. So you can see I've got 3x minus 4 times by itself equals 0. So because these two brackets are the same, I'm going to have just one solution. So null factor law, if something times something equals 0, the first something equals 0 or the second something equals 0. Whichever bracket equals 0, I get 3x minus 4 equals 0. You know how to solve this. Just add 4 to both sides, divide each side by 3. We get x equals 4 over 3. That is the final solution. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.